Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm excited to introduce you to the next episode of the Chief Architect Network's live series of events. Today, I'm very excited to have my guest and friend, Bryan MacDonald, with me today. We're going to be covering one of the topics I think we can all relate to as chief architects and people in the industry, particularly in today's job market. How is it exactly that chief architects get hired? Well, we've got a no better person out there if possible for us to help us learn about this, and Bryan MacDonald, and that he's done this with thousands of folks, navigated my own placements in my team. And honestly, it's been with me in quite a long journey. So I really look up to his experience, and he's helped me a lot in navigating my own search. So very excited to have him with us today. Before we dig in, let's talk a little bit about the network. So the network is actually, its purpose and mission of the network is maximizing the value of architecture practices through our network that widens our perspectives, shares best practices, grows us as leaders, develops our talent, and drives outcomes. We're a community-led, vendor-neutral, and no-cost peer network of chief architects. I'm really excited because we are a network of chief architects that Bryan and I are going to have about a half-hour conversation. You can comment live on LinkedIn, and we'll see those come through. And you can also, for the Chief Architect Network members, join in on camera. And we'll actually have live dialogue with them for the last 15 minutes of this conversation. So at about 30 after, we'll start to bring them onto the stage to ask questions of Bryan. So I honestly look forward to that. It's one of the best parts of the conversation. Okay, well, without any further ado, let me introduce you to my friend Bryan. Hey, Bryan, how are you today?
On your podcast. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. So before we jump into anything, could you share a little bit about yourself and the digital board?
I can share a little bit about myself. I'm usually doing these podcasts on audio. So, I spent most of today making sure, hair and makeup was right. So hopefully that's come across. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. Well, Grant, you and I know each other for a number of years, but for those tuning in, I'm Bryan MacDonald. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called The Digital Board. And as Grant alluded to in the intro, I have spent a lot of time recruiting senior technology leaders, mainly CTOs, CIOs, what you see as CDIOs or CPTOs today, or chief data officers. But 26 years recruiting these senior level leaders. I've worked with many companies across many borders, from, of course, Europe. I'm based in London, but of course, the US, working a lot across, I was going to say both coastlines, but of course, a lot in the middle as well. And that's how obviously we know each other, Grant, through our times at Walgreens. And of course, in the Middle East and Asia, but always in the functional space of technology leadership across multiple industry sectors: retail, consumer goods, industrial, financial services. And the Digital Board is about 13 years old. We're a niche boutique headhunting firm. I'm coming from a big firm background. Prior to that, I was a partner at Heidrick & Struggles, one of the biggest firms in the world, also based in Chicago. So that's probably as much as you need to know about my quick intro, I guess.
That's awesome. That's Bryan in a nutshell. And folks, do engage with us. As you can see here, so here's said hello. Feel free to comment on LinkedIn. We'll see your comments, be able to respond to them live before we get into that on-camera live Q&A with our network members later in the show. So let's get into it, shall we? I'll bring up our conversation, and let's jump in first, kind of how this world works, Bryan. So tell me, the big firms, what's their structure and flow? How does it work?
Just before we go into big firms, maybe let's talk about hiring in general, senior leaders, right? So if you're an organization and for whatever reason you've decided that you need to look outside for talent, you're going to engage a firm like us, right? And you're going to maybe engage them exclusively. Typically, we only work on exclusive assignments. But you have a choice of firm. You go to one of these big 5 headhunting firms, which probably cover about 60-70% of Fortune 500 organizations, or you begin to go down more of a niche path. You might run that search in parallel with an internal search. So you might be looking at your own internal candidates, whilst asking us for input from the outside world. But if you're going to go to a big firm, as I said, you've got 5 to choose from. They are organized globally across matrix lines. You know, they are typically go to market through sectors and functions and sometimes levels. So big firms probably get about 60, 70% of the work. So it's handy to have worked with one of those because you develop a lot of good relationships, which you can port over. And that's pretty much how Walgreens worked when I first met them. Ported a relationship over to the digital board.
Awesome. Let's go into the process a bit. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of, getting from the client's brief into that search process?
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, if you're looking for advice or help on anything, you may have formed a view of what you're looking for, right? You've called it something, a chief architect, chief enterprise architect, chief technology architect, chief whatever. You've decided you need something, or someone's helped you come to the opinion you need something. It could be working with a McKinsey or a BCG or something. And in that, you've kind of tackled in your head, well, what does that look like? What problems does it solve? Usually when it gets to us, it's been so butchered because the wish list has grown from 5 important things to 25 important things, which, yeah, practically speaking, sometimes difficult to put all into one human being. So a lot of the time, the early stages of our work is helping the client understand really what they're asking for. Why are they looking for this particular type of role? Why have they put those types of things into the specification? How will that operate across your global enterprise? What are then your priorities? What will you trade off? Those types of things. So a lot of our work early is meeting multiple stakeholders in that client. So it could be the global technology leader. So it could go up, it could go across, and it could go down into your organization. So we get a rounded perspective on the brief itself. So that's stage 1. And Grant, that can take weeks, right? Because clients, they can be ambitious in terms of what they're looking for without really thinking it through. And some of the time we're learning as well, because we're learning a particular technical role that we may not have dealt with before, a type of architecture. You and I did the business architecture leads. I hadn't recruited a chief business architect before. I'd done chief technical architects, chief architects.
So why did we find a good one?
And then you got to find a good one, and then we got a great one.
We got a great one. Yeah.
But a lot of that is making sure that I can bring something to you. And what we'll often do is we'll bring in someone from my network to help validate the client's assumptions. So an expert in that discipline to say, look, with the client's permission, I want to bring in an individual from the outside, someone I know, someone I trust, and I want them to form part of the brief-taking process. I've literally just done that for a chief product officer for a very large retailer in Germany, where it was a new role that they were creating, and we were just making sure we landed this correctly. So a lot of that early stage is making sure you've got the brief set, the brief is landable. And then you're going to, okay, so how am I going to find a great one of these for our clients? And
I'm curious about one thing before we jump into finding the folks. How do you even find the clients? What's it like to be in your shoes? It's hard for us to even imagine what that's like.
Yeah, I guess like any small business, a lot of it is word of mouth, right? Mm-hmm. A scary stat, Grant, I've interviewed, I think, in excess of 7,000 technology leaders.
I understated that in the intro. I knew it was thousands. It's almost 10,000. That's amazing.
It's closer to 10. For hopefully, actually, most of the clients, this is quite an interesting thing. Most of the clients I work with are candidates that I've interviewed that didn't get the job because they got great feedback through the process. So sometimes I haven't even shortlisted that individual, and I've just been very clear and very upfront and said, hey, look, this is not the right one for you. You're not ready for this. You're not right for this. You're in a different place, or some of your leadership capability is operating at a 6 or a 7 against our 8, 9, or 10 that we need. And this is why. And they've typically said, when I go hiring, I want to work with you. And I'm not saying that for the sake of a conversation or a story. That's a genuine, a lot of our clients have come through that that process. And of course, people that we place as well and successfully. But it's typically the process that they've enjoyed going through. It's thorough. It's very waterfall in technology terminology. It takes a lot of touch points before we will shortlist the individual. So yeah, but it's thorough and it's good. And that's a lot of that comes from that way. I mean, we do a lot of, I guess, outreach through different mechanisms. You know, I run a podcast. We can probably talk about that a little bit later. And I share that podcast with a good friend of mine, a global CTO who's worked in some really, impressive companies in the world. So I've got touch points, I guess. And yeah, and bit of luck sometimes.
Bit of luck. That's now, I don't think we can underestimate that one.
Absolutely.
All right, let's get into it. You're looking for one of us. We're all on this. Actually, it's kind of fun because we're all here. You're at the Chief Architect Network. So how do you go find us as an executive search company?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, first of all, I've got a stunning research team. They might even be listening in. So they're fantastic. They do a great job. But think about three sources of candidate. People you instinctively think of straight off the bat, right? If you went back 20 years, that was probably 80% of your strategy for identification, right? It's flipped around to totally the other way now. You probably know 5% right now because, of course, the world is so small. So you've really got to scour and you've got to identify. So off the bat, you will know instinctively some people and you'll think about that a bit more deeply, as will your team from previous searches, from people that you just think of. The next obvious place you go to is the people that you know and you trust, and you engage them and say, hey, look, I've just got this chief business architect role with Walgreens Boots Alliance, in that saying, like, this is how they're describing a business architecture lead. These are the problems they're trying to tackle. Who can you think of? So they'll make recommendations. I mean, that can be hit or miss or frog kissing because, of course, they've interpreted it a certain way. Number one, they want to help you. Number two, they probably want to help someone that they know. So you can deal with a lot of people who are just not right for that, right? They are right for something, but they're maybe not right for that role, but they've been advocated in because, yeah, they're a good person underneath. And the rest is hardcore search, right?
Mm-hmm.
From LinkedIn tools to other tools to AI, even, to different ways, different mechanisms we've got for identifying through forums, through people who have been referenced in articles, anything like that. The research team is spanning a very wide array, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of profiles are coming into that research team. They've got their wish list of criteria. I look at every single candidate that they like. So I think you and I know this, but we will probably aim to identify about 50 or 60 people at the start of a project that could be, interested in this. We could think about reaching out to get that 50 or 60. The research team have probably looked at a few thousand. They've probably presented about 250 people to me to look at. And I've said, no, don't see it. This is why. I say, I kind of see it. Go dig a bit further. Or I kind of say, like, great, this person looks fantastic. We form that funnel and then we start our outreach. But
awesome. And as you're now kind of got the volumes, what are you looking for when you're picking these individuals?
Yeah, so I mean, we're looking 2D to begin with, right? We're looking at what we see, unless it's referred through to through a contact. We're looking through a 2D lens at the moment. I mean, ultimately, we're trying to match something that resembles the size and the scale and the complexity of the organization you're looking for, first of all. Not in every case, right? Because sometimes, an organization will deliberately target a more niche player, smaller, well-known in their space. But, if you're recruiting for a large CPG company, they're interested in other large CPG companies or retail or any other parallel organizational sector that has, as I said, parallels to that. Layer two, you're looking for culture fit, right? You're not looking at an organization. If you're recruiting for someone that's highly matrixed, very consensus in their decision making, you're not looking for, targeting command control structures. And sometimes you know who those are, and sometimes you have to find those out. But 2D, we're looking for size, scale, complexity, fit, size of role, looks about right. We're looking at sensible career trajectories. So what does that mean, sensible career trajectories? We want to see breadth of experience in different roles. So put it into focus, chief architect. Of course, you want to see the logical path, through technology leadership roles or domain roles into leadership roles. But we really would love to see some other things. We'd love to see them run, infrastructure team or run an application development team for a while. We'd love to see them having been a program lead in something, had a transformation effort somewhere that looked like they just didn't see life through a purist lens, right? We want to see more than 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years in roles, right? I know, don't even just mean companies. I mean, even within one company, we want to see that they've gone through 3-4 years in a particular role in a particular company, because first 12 months, a lot of that, if it's a big company, is getting your head around what you've signed up for. The next 12 months or 18 months is really about getting into the hard yards, and you want to see that they saw that through a little bit, maybe year 4 sometimes. Not in every role that they do, but you don't want to just see 2 year, 2 year, 2 year, because it just looks like they keep spinning around through either great advocacy and they're fantastic, but they've never really lived with some of their big decisions, right? So those are kind of things we look for. But these are the 2D elements that we're looking for. This is before we actually speak with someone, right?
Well, keep going. Step into 3D.
3D, of course, we want to talk to them. It's quite an interesting process, Grant. I'm sure you've been approached many times from different headhunters, but at the beginning, we are positioning something. People could get this wrong, is if we're selling something. We're selling nothing. We're not giving anything away here. We are introducing a concept to a candidate that we've got something pretty interesting around this role, and we want to talk to them about it. So of course, we will spend the effort to articulate what the proposition is, who the client is, why they're hiring, how the organization is constructed, how this role fits into it, how this role fits into their transformation agenda, if that's the case. And we'll outline some of the key criteria that we're looking for. And then we'll put it over to them, ask some questions. What do you want to know about the organization? And then we'll do this kind of 180 on them almost. And it's not a yank 180. It's a slow pivot towards, tell me more about you. Tell me, does that, resonate with you, what we're talking about? Tell me where you see the parallels in your background. Yeah. What are the things that you think you would bring value, or where do you think you bring value to this? So you've done this kind of clever switcheroo. Then you're talking about more hygienic things, of course. You're talking about like, well, this position is based in here. This compensation structure is roughly around this type of thing. Does this roughly fit with you? Yeah. And where are you at? We've reached out to you, of course, but where are you at yourself? Are you just passively interested in things? Are you, assertively looking at the moment? And we're just trying to get a picture of like, where is this candidate? I mean, they've obviously responded to our outreach, so there's something that's grabbed them. But we're just trying to form opinion in those, for a basis of those early conversations. Like, is this someone that we think will go through all the heats? So if you imagine it like a tennis competition, these are the qualifiers, right? The main competition is happening somewhere, but these are the qualifier rounds, and then they're going to go through round 1, round 2, and so on, all the way to the final, hopefully. So we're just trying to get an early sense of that. And as I said, we'll try and target 50 or 60 people, and we'll probably speak to 80% of those people. Most people will respond to us. And sometimes off the bat, they'll say, hey, Bryan, I just wanted to talk to you or talk to your team. This is kind of interesting, but this is maybe a catalyst for us to get to know you and your firm a little bit better. And maybe I can tell you what I'm really looking for.
Anand here popped in with a question that, as you're building your list of 50, 60, 70 people, how is it that you kind of get get our best get into those profiles? And tell me how your team can kind of see past that at times, right? Where is it all about what the candidate puts out there, and where is it more than just what's on the resume? It's our networking efforts, et cetera, from that perspective.
Yeah, so let's think about less about 2D and 3D, and let's talk about layers perhaps, right? Mm-hmm. So layer 1 might be a LinkedIn profile. And we're not really looking for hashtags, and we're not looking for everything that people have put in. And
I got to change my whole thing. I thought it was all about
no, but people will be. We might not operate the same way as everybody else. And maybe if you're looking across these thousands, we're actually, a process will look like this, Grant. It will, if we're using LinkedIn, for example, And let's just say, for the sake of argument, because it's something we know, Walgreens Boots Alliance, right? We know that is a multi-jurisdictional organization operating different types of business units across the world. It has a semi-command control structure right at the top, and the rest is federated down through leadership and so on. So you've got to come from a company typically like that to get any sense of like knowing how to land. So we will have a map of pretty much 75 companies around the world that we know look something like that. So they're at the time 140 billion in revenue. We'd say anything above 40 to 50 billion in revenue is fine, right? Because margins are less relevant. But we'll say and recommend other organizations like that we haven't thought of. So maybe the tech on LinkedIn is doing a little bit of work, for us on that basis. But we'll look at that. We'll look at that map first of all. None of that is about hashtags or what they've said. Then, of course, we're looking at, has this person done a role similar to that through a similar title, chief technology architect or whatever that is. And then if we're not seeing enough profiles, I'll just say to the team, look at what we're actually trying to achieve. Forget the title. Who cares about the title? Company X could call it something, company Y could call it something else. We're not really interested in that. We're looking at the core criteria for functional experience and leadership experience, and then those things like scale, complexity, size, culture, that type of thing. But we will be looking for, we will want to see that that they're not just full of responsibilities, but they've actually had achievements. We want to see, you and I know
outcomes.
Outcomes. And ideally, we want to see those outcomes linked to business outcomes.
Right.
I don't want to just hear that you've re-architected something for the sake of it. I want to hear why. I want to hear how did that serve the customer? I don't just mean the stakeholder, I mean the end customer. How did that change the way you did pharmacy renewal, or how did that change the way you did whatever you did? Did it have an outcome that you could link to? If you think about product as OKRs, we're looking for a sort of like an OKR type thing on someone's resume.
That's super helpful. Believe it or not, we're ripping through time. Let's step into the next topic around conversations with you and your team. I know there's 3 points of engagement. Tell me a little bit about kind of how each of them work and how a candidate can really stand out in these conversations.
Well, I mean, the candidate, first of all, of course, when we're getting into that, I'll use that term 3D again, where we're getting into that conversation, we're looking for things that anybody looks for, manners. Right. We're looking for somebody who is engaging, who's polite, who can listen, who picks up on what you're saying and is engaging with it and is able to explain a little bit about themselves, articulate who they are, what they're about, that isn't seeing it as sort of like, oh, you're trying to headhunt me, and is being a bit awkward about it. It's somebody who said, hey, it's just natural and engaging. That's great, Luke. It's a early stage conversation. I'm happy to have it. So just basic, kind of behaviors are step one. The team, of course, are feeding all of those things back to me. The more, and I don't mean I want them to have a list of 50 questions, but the more intelligent questions that they ask at the early stage of the process, the better, rather than the hygiene questions.
Yeah.
What's their approach to working from home is a really boring question. I know, of course, people want to work from home, but I want to hear that as a hygiene question way further down the line to what's driving this hire. Like, where are they at? What level of maturity, Bryan, would you describe this organization at vis-a-vis what you're saying this role is? What do you see? And to my team, so using them as like, you know a little bit about this client, hopefully, can you tell me a little bit? Can you bring it to life? So we're looking for people who can engage, who can ask intelligent questions, who can represent their experience, well.
Very helpful. And the 3 calls, right? First, contact from your team. Second, the qualifying, and third, the deep dive, right?
Yeah.
Any high level notes you want to share about those touch points?
Yeah, I mean, the first call we've probably covered, right? That's that sort of initial call with the team. If they make it, so that's the qualifying rounds, right? If they make it through that, they're going to speak to someone else in my team who's like, okay, it's a little bit like looking at a home, right? The first viewing can be stacked full of emotion, right? You're like, oh, I love it, right? We can be like, oh my God, I love them. They're amazing. They're fantastic. They look fantastic, from the person who and my team makes that outreach. We want to bring in a little bit of objectivity into this, right? We want the second person's going to be like, hey, I know you spoke with Sheena, for example, or we know you spoke with Alex, but I want to have a chat with you more objectively. Tell me a little bit more about this. So it's a more qualifying kind of question. This is, I think you refer to as the white glove service when we work together. And the third one, if they make it through that, is going to be a session with me. And that's most likely going to be an hour and a half, maybe up to 2 hours. And we're going to get into a lot, right? Motivation, fit, their questions, all those types of things. Yeah. And I'll probably interview 9 or 10 candidates to shortlist 4.
Makes sense. So you've met the candidate and like them, and now you're thinking about presenting them to the client. Give us a peek behind the curtain. How does it work? What's really happening?
I mean, the client's not blind to the process, as you know, right? The client's getting, almost a completely transparent process all the way through, right? I say almost because people will share things with you in confidence that they'll want you to share with your client, but it's an almost transparent process. They'll see the long list, they'll see how that's maturing towards through your 3 stages towards an inevitable. These are the 10 people you're interviewing, Bryan. I'm really keen to hear how you got on with John, with Anne, with whoever that is, right? And then with that, of course, you're engaging with the candidate. You're saying, look, are you ready to go? We think you're ready. Are you ready to go with this? Do you need to speak to your family? Because, I mean, Grant, probably 30%, 40% of our roles involve some form of relo, right?
Yeah.
So, it's not single stakeholder stuff. You're talking, speak to your wife, speak to your husband. Kids factor into that depending on their age and their schooling and all those types of things, right? So make sure you're ready, because if I'm presenting you, I need to know I'm presenting you having you done all of your due diligence to say yes, right? So we go through that process. And then on that call with the client, we're typically going through those 10 interviews. We can probably say, look, 2 straight away, they're not right. Culture fit, readiness, whatever. But we've probably got 8 contenders, and we're going to try and get to 4, sometimes 5. And we'll just go through criteria. And a lot of that will boil down to, Bryan, me, who do you think will work well with me? Who do you think will really work well in this organization? If you were to force rank them, who will survive those torrid first 12 months of learning our culture, learning our ways of working, all that kind of stuff. That's awesome. And then we make the recommendations. The other candidates, we will tell them, look, you didn't make the first cut. It's not over, right? Sometimes it does come back to them, right? But not always. But we will say, look, if your ego can take it, bear with us. We'll keep you live on this. We'll let you know if there is a revisit at all.
Well, we're about rounding the corner, getting into Q&A for the network. If you want to ask a question, pop on camera so we know you're ready. We're about 2 minutes away from that. So candidates about to start, right? The great news happened.
We got to go back a little bit, actually, because
sure.
I think preparation for candidates is really important, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're presenting candidates. Candidates should be, really prepared when they meet the client for the first time. We're going to do a ton of that work for them. So we're going to present to them a very solid brief. You've seen the briefs that we've written that should be able to explain the organization's mission, culture, purpose, all the way down to the role, etc. But we'll also send them videos of our clients presenting. We'll send them snippets of different things, but we'll ask them to work at it as well. Be sure that when you meet, the 2 of you meet for the first time, you're hitting the rubber hitting the road. And that's really, really important, Grant, before we go through anything else, that conversation is a very warm conversation right from the get-go, because they will have an hour with each other. At the end of that, a determination is yes, no, right? So we'll prep them. I'll spend half an hour, 40 minutes pre their interviews and make sure that they're ready.
Makes sense. And I've seen you do it with clients we've worked together. With candidates we've worked together on. I think that's an incredibly important part of the process is helping them show up their best. And that gives everyone the best opportunity.
Yeah. So that they can have a really on point conversation. Yeah. And clients need to prepare as well, right? They need to they're not just picking up the resume for the first time before the individual walks in.
So, thinking about some parting advice before we kind of step into a little bit of dialogue. How would you suggest candidates go about making their way forward there was one thing you wanted people to walk away with, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, headhunter is like any professional. You're gonna bump into different types, right? You're gonna get ones that you're really impressed with, that you want to have in your network, that you want to have as a sounding board, and just to run. Hey, I've been approached for this. I'd love, Bryan. Do you have 10 minutes? Just does it sound like that's a good role? Whatever. Even if it's not from us. But there's going to be ones that you don't force that relationship. Try and keep an open mind. My personal view is, particularly if you're operating at the senior level, there's good ones out there. Try and find those. Get them into your network. I mean, I think the rule of thumb is that 80% of people find their job when they're not looking for a job. Yeah. When they're looking for a job through a headhunter, sorry, and when they're looking for a job, it's harder. But you need these advocates. People will call me. Other headhunters will call me and say, "What do you think of Grant Ecker?" Yeah,
Oh,
they do.
no.
Yeah, and I'll do the same, right? And so make sure that you know your brand is, yeah, it's good, it's solid, but try and get to know some good ones and ask for feedback.
Really helpful. And for our listeners, feel free to add comments into the LinkedIn chat. That will be how we can feature you and get Bryan to answer what questions you might have for the network. Feel free to use the URL to log in, ask a question on video. Just come on video so we know you're ready. Um, and as we're getting folks lined up to potentially ask questions or join us, I'd love to kind of just invite our listeners. This isn't the end of the journey with Bryan. Bryan runs a number of platforms that are out there to really help us in terms of getting ready for these roles, positioning ourselves, even an entire library of research called the High Performing Leaders. I think there's another word I'm missing there, Bryan. Maybe you can help me. But
It's
can you
just
tell us
called
a
high
little bit about the High
performance
Performing
leaders.
Leaders
Yeah,
resource
yeah.
tool?
I can give you a quick 1 minute on that. So, well, I think I said I interviewed something like 7,000 senior technology leaders. What you get to understand is that there's a certain set of characteristics that stand out in high performing leaders, and I broke that down into 10 major competencies. I won't go through all 10. They're on the website. Then I thought, okay, well, it's great to be able to articulate what those 10 are, and we define them through characteristics, behaviors. These are things, the diagnostic process that we offer our clients. So we were really getting great at assessing them and helping clients assess them. And then clients were saying to, but can you help us develop these leaders? Can you help us think about the things that you see in others and how you go about doing that? And that's not really our business. Like, our core business is assessment and recommendation, but we ventured into that. The team managed to assemble something like 1,000 resources that map to these 10 individual competencies. So whether I'll pick one, leading through ambiguity.
Mhm.
As a leader, like, things are not black and white on many dimensions, right? So how as a leader, particularly if you're held to account on deliverables that can be quite black and white, how do you navigate the political complexity, the ambiguity that sits around stakeholders, opinions, thoughts, engagement styles, fast moving parts? How do you think about that? Well, we probably find about 100 resources, whether that's an article from HBR, whether it's a TED Talk, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a book, whether it's a course that a university is running on it. The team map those resources, and you can find those on the website, and it's free. I mean, these are resources that are publicly available. We've just curated them.
This is important for folks to hear. We're not selling something here. In fact, we never do on the Chief Architect Network. It's in our rules. What we're talking about is free curated resources that the digital board has made available for any job searcher. You sign up, you create an account. I've done it myself. And you can browse these HBR articles now without a license because Bryan pays for it. The ability to share that with the network is part of how he gives back. So I really do encourage you to check this out. The other thing that's out there that I think is highly valuable is your podcast, Bryan. Could you share a little bit more
Yeah.
about your podcast?
Yeah, I mean, of course, podcasts are not new, and many people have been on them for some time. But I was having a lunch with a really good friend of mine. He was the CTO for Walmart Labs. He'd been the CTO at the Emirates Group, the airline that operates in the Middle East, and also a business called Yoox Net-a-Porter. So for all the female leaders out there, they'll know Net-a-Porter pretty well as a fashion platform for luxury. He and I were having lunch in Tuscany, in Italy, and we were in Florence, sorry, and we were talking about podcasts, and he said, have you ever thought about doing one? I was like, I do so many things on my own. I don't want to do another thing on my own. He's like, why don't we do it together? So long story short, we talked a lot about, well, what would we talk about? And we created the platform Beyond the Tech. And in that platform, we interview typically global heads of technology, talk a little bit biographically around how did they ever get to that role? You know, what are the steps that they took through their early career, some of the leadership challenges that they faced, advice that they would give to others. We go semi-biographical, and then we might even pick a topic up, like what do you see in AI at the moment? What is exciting you? What is scaring you? How do you land these types of things within your organization to get traction? So it's just a fun way of interviewing people without having to determine whether they're shortlisted or not. It's a great way of just speaking to people about their life journey. And of course, it's just something we're doing, you know, on the side. But anybody can follow. We've had thousands of people listen to these podcasts. I think we've only done episode 9 or something like that. You know, so it's fairly new, but well, so far I'm getting some good feedback. So fingers crossed.
That's awesome. We've got some questions that have come in. Let's see, I'll start with Sundar. So when you give feedback into a sensitivity, defensiveness, ego issue, someone we both know quite well, what advice would you give to people receiving feedback and the mindset they should strive for? And what would be the most helpful for their own development?
Yeah. Feedback's a hard thing to give, but it's an even harder thing to receive, right? Some people are receptive to feedback. The feedback that I've been given, the first rule is feedback's a gift. Don't turn down or turn away a gift. So if you're experiencing feedback, then no matter how it's been positioned to you, because people should ask you, are you open to some feedback, first of all, right? But let's say they don't. Take it as a gift, right? Number one, I think that's important. Try and contextualize the feedback. First of all, this person is trying to give me some help, give me some advice. That feedback it's important that people hear it through, okay, so if it's about a behavior, if it's something that they're not demonstrating in the interview. So I've said to people, I just shortlisted some candidates, and one candidate, I said, look, you have got a phenomenal amount of passion. It's really intoxicating, but it's not channeled at times, right? And I can be guilty of that. You know, experience maybe on the podcast. You've got to channel that passion to make sure it's landing, and you've got to use your EQ, your social competence, to make sure it's landing and move on, right? And you're not doing it. So don't take this the wrong way. I don't want to kill the thing that makes you who you are, but moderate it so that you put yourself in a position of choice, right? That's the thing. Let me sure I read the rest of the question. What people receiving feedback? Yeah, the mindset they should strive for. There is a terminology out there called servant leadership. I know it's a very popular term in the US. I like it if what people are serving is the outcome, as opposed to the hierarchy, right? And I think it's really important that leaders, particularly if they're aspiring leaders, don't get too caught up in being overly deferential to stakeholders and behaviors. So I would say to other people on the other side of that, if the feedback is be bolder, don't be afraid to hold your position. Do it with elegance and eloquence, right? But don't overinterpret servant leadership to being deferential. Do it to say, how does this drive customer change? How does this drive shareholder change? That type of thing. So I think that's how I would try and position it.
That's an awesome question, Sundar. I find a lot of what makes us successful is being open to that EQ and those moments of learning.
This is a great question here from John. Yeah. I like that. I'm determining if the organization leadership understands EA and is receptive to using EA to improving leadership team effectiveness. As I was in Amsterdam with you and some of your colleagues,
Thanks
Grant,
for making the trip. That was a lot of fun.
I was delighted to. I was presenting a shortlist to a client, and I said, "Hey, sorry, I jumped out of a session. I'm in Amsterdam at the moment." And the client said, "Oh, what are you doing there?" And I said, "I was talking at this chief architect event." He's like, "Oh, another event that architects go to. Is that all they ever do?" and he's a global CTO. And I said, "Oh, where does that comment come from?" He's like, "Oh, I'm just like, I worry that they live in ivory towers or whatever." And I said, "Is that your personal perception of someone you've hired, or is that, you know, as you would say, an industry kind of theme?" He's like, "Oh, it's maybe my personal perception." Right. So what I'm illustrating here, first of all, you might have some barriers to overcome. Your organization may not know the true value of an enterprise architecture, team. I'm guessing they know some of it because they've established one. I think a lot of the responsibility is stakeholder socialization, right? Help them understand the role that you and your team are trying to do by asking them really tough questions. Because the tougher those questions are, the more they go like, "I don't know the answer to those things, and it seems that I probably should know." Is that what your team helped with? And part of that is like, yes, those are the kind of things that we get involved in every day. And that somehow, I'm of course generalizing across what could be 100 different scenarios here. But if you ask tough questions, and then if you use that as a license to explain, look, we are trying to provide value here. We're operating across these multiple jurisdictions, business units. We're trying to take more than a helicopter view of what's going on. We're trying to act as that connecting point through ideas, through solutions, whatever that is, to make sure everybody's on the same page. I think, I don't want to tell a chief architect how to present what enterprise architecture is, but there is something about asking tough questions and providing value in the answer, I would say.
Awesome. Well, we have Divi here with us live, one of the most members of the network. Divi, do you have a question? Would love to hear what you might have in mind.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. I think it's a great session, a lot of great insights. I think just expanding on that, as a chief architect, right, you want to probably work for the company which has the sponsorship and is really serious about using EA to really make a difference in the business outcomes. How do you help through the process, right? Because I've seen sometimes McKinsey or BCG has come and they've said, yes, we want this role, but the organization is not clear what this role will contribute to.
It's a brilliant question. It talks to this retail organization that we're working with at the moment in Germany. So they're creating a chief product officer. They have had product management in their organization. We're talking about product rather than architecture, but the parallel will stay the same. They've been working with, I'm not going to name who it is. They've actually worked for two of those firms that you just mentioned on strategy. And I think there's an awful lot of slideware, right? And our job is to try and translate all of those, statements of ambition into a human being. So I bring in someone who's extraordinary in this to what he would say is create fertile ground for this leader to be able to be successful in the role along with us. And that's quite an ask for the client to engage with. They're already working with a very expensive strategy firm, but inevitably where the rubber hits the road is where their reputation is going to be landed there as a group leader in this. So we'd help them talk about how do you translate high-level strategic ambition? How do you create a common language, right? What does it look like when you actually see someone in there? And how are you going to support their ongoing success through advocacy? But at some stage, of course, it has to flip around. That individual needs to take the baton and socialize extremely effectively with their broader stakeholder group, like going out, like as a chief architect, honestly, I would, if you're working in a logistics business, go out to warehouses, go out to end customers, where those logistics are hitting, the retailer or whoever it is. Spend time through the value chain so you can talk to actual points of failure or points of success. I think that's maybe his ivory tower comment. I don't think it's an ivory tower because I don't think we have ivory towers anywhere. But I think what he's talking about is maybe sometimes technology folks are a little bit away from the actual rubber in the road
Sure.
That I would encourage those two things heavily.
No, thank you, Bryan. That's very helpful, right? And personally,
Thank
I
you for
think,
joining us.
yeah, thank you.
So I've got Karsten with us, and
Hi, Karsten.
Karsten's with the CDO Times. Karsten, what was your question or comment?
Yeah, thank you. It's been really eye-opening to kind of look behind the scenes of what recruiters, executive recruiters are doing and the process that they're going through. I've seen from some articles that I wrote and some folks that I spoke to, I've seen that there's been a lot of changes in the job market. You know, a lot of people are being released, even from the beginning, from the COVID times to current tech layoffs. So a lot of people are in between jobs, sometimes, you know, doing gig working and shorter stints due to the fact that things just have changed, right?
Yeah.
How do you recommend for folks that want to come back into kind of the corporate world, you know, after being in consulting, to come back and look at leadership roles?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Karsten. And we don't specialize necessarily in candidate management, but I give you just good advice. You go along. First of all, when you're in the job, before that occasion has happened, because it may happen again in the future, have a network. Really have a network. Don't just have a network on LinkedIn that you say that I follow X thousand people and X thousand people follow me. Nurture that network. Yeah. If you're looking at that at the precise moment and you're out of work, that you're going to be hopefully going through some interview process at some stage, right? And you may well be rusty. I would encourage those people to go to their network and say, look, I worked for you, or I worked alongside you last year, 2 years ago, many years ago, whatever it is. Would you be open to giving me some feedback of what it's like to work with me? Yeah, positive as well as negative, or anything like that you can say. That, and somebody says, oh, hey, we haven't spoken for a while. How are you? Whatever it is. And maybe they're going to tell you their organization is looking for someone, or they're going to tell you that they've just recently been approached for a role that they said no to, but whatever it is. Let's say that happens. Let's say the second thing happens. They say, like, Bryan, it's I loved working with you. You brought so much energy and passion, etc. And so on. But, you know, there were some times where you were here. The reason I'm telling you that is because when they go to interview and when they get that awful question, is like, well, tell me about things you're not so good at, or tell me about the things that you work on as areas of development, or even bluntly, what are your weaknesses, which is a terrible question. But let's say they get asked that, and they can say, well, look, it's really interesting because I reached out to my network recently, some people I used to work beside, and I asked them that exact question. And what they said was this, and that interviewer, be it a headhunter or HR leader or functional leader, says, oh, they're thinking about it. They're engaged, right? So you're differentiating. So two things are happening. One, you're percolating your network up a little bit, right? Because you're going to have to work hard for that. And second, I hope you're getting some great insights that you can then use and translate into conversations. And hopefully that stands out as a differentiator.
Right. Yeah, what I've seen also is it's super important to, you know, network, be in events like this with, you know, the Chief Architecture Network, or, you know, even CDO Times, you know, as opportunities to kind of showcase yourself and expand your reach. So, you know,
yeah, there's probably 2 or 3 other things I would say. If you think about it, if you're in a technology leadership role, chief architect or other, you've worked with a ton of outside people. You've worked with systems integrators, you've worked for technology companies, vendors. Talk to them. Ask them, what are they seeing? Can they help you? Are they working with a particular client? Because surefire, they would love to see you back in a senior role again if you had a good relationship with them, right? So they might say, hey, do you know that the New York Times or whoever are looking for a chief architect at the moment? We're working on that, whatever that is, right? So use that particular network for advocacy and so on. But work really hard. I mean, Grant, you know, you can probably talk about some of the things that we've talked about. Having a point of view. You don't need to work quite as hard as Grant doing it across all these different channels in terms of running networks. It's phenomenal. I'm super impressed with the energy and the Superman, you know, pants and outside of your trousers that you do for your brand building. It's really impressive. But do something, right? Speak to Carson and see if you can be quoted in one of his articles. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, I met Grant at a CIO conference, and I can just vouch for, you know, meeting in person is very important. And I just can see that he's like a high quality, top-notch leader, right? And he has the right attitude, and it comes across in every interaction that I have with him. So, I think that
one piece of advice on that is give before you ask, right? Because when you're at networking events or whatever it is, and there's people that are on you for, can I tell you all about me? Ask about them first of all, get them to talk, and then they're like, I love that conversation because they were talking about themselves. Tell me about you. What are you doing? Whatever that is. Okay. Don't be the pusher. Be the puller.
I'd love to leave us with this question from Boz. And Karsten, thank you so much for popping in. It was awesome seeing you. So this is just a fun one because I think we live this quite a bit in our what is your observation in the correlation of clients believe the CA role is and what they need the CA role to be? It's too good. Boz, we had to do it.
I feel like Boz knows exactly what he's asking there.
He's meddling a little bit.
He knows what that is. I mean, of course, organizations are all different points of maturity, right? Not just about architectural, functions or whatever that is. So that same question could be applied across lots of different, disciplines within technology. I think the politically correct answer is most clients are naive as to what they're really asking for in that role and that leadership. And we're not the sole people to, kind of put them on a full course correct, but we're part of that process, right? But I would say, in fairness to Baz's question, most organizations, not everyone, don't really understand the true role of EA. They understand pretty much architecture to a certain extent, right? Around the different disciplines of it, but EA but maybe there's a little bit of brand responsibility on enterprise architects as well to bring that to life for those clients, like we said at the beginning. But I think it's a good question, and I think he's onto something.
Yeah, we all struggle with that once we come in the role, is kind of shaping the leadership perspective. Well, Bryan, I can't thank you enough for being here, and I also love the points you made about the network. Speaking of the network, if you're a chief architect, apply to join us, chiefarchitectnetwork.com, and certainly reach out and connect with Bryan. This is just an opportunity to be introduced to him. Go to thedigitalboard.com, check out their free resources for professionals. And I'm sorry, I made a little cheat, tiny URL, and I just made this really quick, Bryan MacDonald podcast. It's of course not called that. It's called Beyond the Tech, but this is just a quick URL you could type. So please engage with Bryan, connect with him on LinkedIn, connect with me as well, and really appreciate you guys spending some time with us today. I hope you have a great rest of your week and look forward to joining you in future episodes.
It's been great.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.